Anastasia pointed out his mistake, explaining that it was a free selection exam where he wasn't supposed to answer everything. Hearing this, Eftel couldn't believe he had completed all the questions when he only needed to tackle 30% of them. The following week, someone in the academy shouted in amazement, 958 points. It turned out the school management was incredulous that an applicant had answered every question. Subsequently, the headmaster, Lucent, a man with no eyes but suspiciously large eyebrows, demanded to know the applicant's name, and a bespectacled teacher revealed it was a student named Eftel, who curiously shared the name of the Emperor of Thunder. Still skeptical, Lucent concluded that the brat must have cheated, but then Bauer strode into the office and informed the officials that during the physical examination, Eftel had activated a level 4 parallel activation, leaving them all in total shock. With this revelation, Lucent speculated that Eftel might be the second coming of the Emperor of Thunder. On the day of the eligibility results, all the students gathered at the school, eager to see if they had been accepted into the academy. Eftel and Anastasia were present too, and moments later, Anastasia hugged Eftel, exclaiming that she had been accepted into the special class. Though overjoyed for her, Eftel had a problem. He couldn't find his number. Frantically, he searched everywhere, but failing to locate it, he grew frustrated, wondering if his overachieving mistake of answering all the questions had cost him admission. Just then, Anastasia drew his attention to a notice on the wall, and when Eftel checked, he discovered he had topped the exams and been elected as the representative of the special student. Beaming, Anastasia congratulated him for his brilliant mind, which made Eftel blush in embarrassment as he pondered what being the representative entailed. While heading to enroll, Anastasia handed Eftel a letter explaining that as the representative, he would be the poster boy for the special students. Upon entering the hall for enrollment, Eftel froze when he spotted a hot chick who bore a striking resemblance to Merlin. After staring intently, Eftel became certain it was indeed Merlin and wondered why she was on the school premises. Swiftly, Eftel made the executive decision to hide, knowing that if Merlin, who knew him well from his past life, spotted him, she might sense something amiss. Thus, he suggested to Anastasia that they leave the area and head deeper into the academy. Meanwhile, as Merlin walked, she felt an oddly familiar presence, but when she turned to look, no one was there. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had sensed Eftel, which seemed impossible since he was dead. Suddenly, she caught sight of Eftel departing with Anastasia, prompting her to chase after him and call him to a halt. Merlin asked Eftel if he was related to Emperor Stormgale in any way. Aware he couldn't disclose his true identity, Eftel denied knowing what she meant and swiftly dragged Anastasia away, claiming they were late for lunch, which only heightened Merlin's suspicion. Later that afternoon, while eating lunch, Eftel confided to Anastasia that the woman he'd spoken to was her distant relative, Merlin. However, Anastasia admitted it was her first encounter with Merlin. Anastasia then explained that, according to her parents, the Demon Lord was her ancestor, and since Merlin was the Demon Lord's daughter, she was essentially Anastasia's great-great-aunt, which clarified why Anastasia didn't recognize her. Subsequently, Eftel couldn't help but wonder what Merlin was doing at the academy. According to Anastasia, Merlin served as the headmaster of Alfina Academy, which made Eftel wonder if the real purpose Merlin had come to the academy was to teach. Later that day, clad in their school uniforms, Eftel and Anastasia attended the freshman welcome event, where Lucent congratulated and welcomed the students. Lucent addressed the scholarship class, the noble class, the commoner class, and the honorary position under which Eftel was categorized. Following the welcome speech, the headmaster introduced Merlin as a special guest, thrilling the students but sending Eftel into a panic. Nevertheless, Eftel felt relieved upon realizing Merlin was only a guest, not a teacher. Suddenly, his soul nearly left his body when he was called to deliver a speech as the honorary student. Upon hearing Eftel's name announced, Merlin grew even more suspicious. As Eftel approached the podium, he couldn't ignore Merlin's piercing stare. After the event, while in class, a group of hot chicks were all over Eftel, begging to cream on his sausage or just get an STD from him. But just then, Merlin stormed into the classroom with a bad and bougie presence and slammed Eftel's exam paper onto his desk. Before the thirsty baddies could say a word, Merlin shot them a back off my man glare and ordered them to leave, instantly scaring the thirstiness out of them. Once the room cleared, Merlin asked Eftel if that was indeed his name, and when he confirmed it, she pressed him on whether he knew what reincarnation meant, to which Eftel, startled, falsely claimed he'd never heard the term before. Next, Merlin presented his written exam answers, noting they mirrored exactly what the legendary Stormgale would have written if alive. Moreover, she pointed out that not only did Eftel get every answer correct, but his responses were so archaic, dating back 400 years, that they baffled the teachers. Merlin immediately demanded an explanation for the coincidence, and in that moment, Eftel realized he'd messed up by not updating his knowledge before the exam. Yet, before he could respond, Merlin softened, admitting he reminded her of someone dear to her heart. Acknowledging she might have come on too strong, Merlin apologized and mused that, while reincarnation seemed far-fetched, Eftel bore a striking resemblance to her master. At that instant, Eftel considered revealing his reincarnation, but knowing it would complicate his pursuit of magic, he instead beckoned Merlin to come closer. As she leaned in, Eftel whispered that Emperor Stormgale had a mistress, and he was a descendant of their secret love child. He added that Stormgale had ensured he inherited all sorcery knowledge without ever revealing his existence. Infuriated by this, Merlin grabbed Eftel by the hair, put him in a chokehold, and warned him never to share that secret, as it would tarnish Stormgale's honor as one of the 4 emperors. Satisfied with his deception, Merlin rose, head bowed, and expressed sorrow that her master had hidden having a child with some random hag. Nonetheless, Merlin declared that she felt a strong urge now to test who was a stronger disciple between the two of them. Merlin then mentioned hearing that, as the honors student, Eftel was slated for a mock battle with a teacher later that day. It turned out the faculty had insisted Eftel participate to prove that no matter how strong a student was, they couldn't rival a true mage. With that, Merlin demanded to be that teacher and challenged Eftel to a showdown on the combat practice field, leaving him stunned. Though Eftel knew this risked exposing his identity and derailing his plans, he couldn't resist wanting to see how Merlin had grown over 400 years, so he accepted. Several hours later, at the Academy's combat field, Eftel and Merlin prepared for their duel. The students buzzed with excitement to witness the renowned Merlin showcase her magic in person. As the duel commenced, Eftel suggested starting with warm-ups, to which Merlin agreed. Without delay, Eftel launched a Tier 6 flame formation at Merlin, who was astonished he considered such a powerful move a mere warm-up. However, Merlin countered with a Tier 7 impregnable wall, shielding herself from the blast and visibly impressing Eftel. She proclaimed that, even if Eftel was the 13th generation Stormgale descendant, she still upheld her pride as his first student. Following this, Merlin retaliated with a Tier 6 flame formation, but just as Merlin did, Eftel erected a Tier 7 impregnable wall to block it. Immediately afterward, Merlin unleashed another fire explosion spell, startling Eftel and alarming the onlookers. Swiftly, Eftel summoned a Tier 7 freezing spell to neutralize her fire, then followed it with a Tier 7 glacial arrow attack to demonstrate his own rapid casting. Back in the past, this rapid chantless casting spell was devised by Stormgale so as to keep up with his fellow sages. Merlin was shocked to see that Eftel could cast a spell without delay, but she immediately summoned an impregnable wall to block the glacier arrow. Undeterred, Eftel rapid cast more glacial arrows, but Merlin blocked each one with multiple impregnable walls. To push her further, Eftel unleashed a massive glacial arrow at Merlin. Shocked by its scale, Merlin quickly summoned an equally mighty impregnable wall to counter it. The intense force shattered her wall, pushing her back, and at that moment, Eftel scolded her for her sloppy spell formation. Hearing this, Merlin felt as though she were being reprimanded by Stormgale himself. Spurred by this to prove her ability to her master, Merlin summoned a formidable Tier 7 impregnable wall, causing Eftel's eyes to widen in sheer amazement. The two continued their fierce exchange, and with each move Eftel made, Merlin saw echoes of her master in him. Briefly pausing the duel, Merlin thanked Eftel for rekindling cherished memories and confessed that, throughout their fight, she saw a spitting image of her beloved master. Then, to conclude the hours-long battle, Merlin announced that if Eftel could withstand her ultimate attack, she would concede. Right after speaking, she summoned a Tier 8 Thunder God's Hammer, surprising Eftel, who hadn't expected such a spell to be her finisher. In an instant, the hammer swelled tenfold in size, leaving Eftel reeling. Immediately following, Merlin rapid cast another spell, then a third with a kick, catching Eftel off guard as he struggled to dodge. Yet, Merlin was just beginning. From her right leg, she cast yet another spell, astonishing Eftel and thrilling him to see her growth over 400 years. He felt gratified that, after his death, Merlin had relentlessly honed her skills. Inspired and competitive, Eftel decided it was time to reveal the full might of Emperor Stormgale. Just as Eftel prepared to strike, Merlin unleashed a massive level 8 lightning spell, triggering a devastating explosion that rocked the entire school building. Panicked, the students in the arena scattered for safety, while Merlin, losing control, nearly succumbed to the lightning's power. However, in that critical moment, Eftel snapped his fingers, absorbing most of the lightning and restoring calm across the arena. Collapsing amid the rubble, Merlin couldn't understand how Eftel had neutralized such a colossal attack with a mere snap of the finger. Laughing in realization, Merlin became convinced Eftel wasn't some illegitimate child, as only one person, Stormgale himself, could perform such a feat. When Eftel approached Merlin with a smile to check if she was okay, Merlin blurted out that he was Stormgale's reincarnation. Realizing the jig was over, Eftel admitted the truth, prompting Merlin to embrace him instantly. As she sat on the ground like a loyal dog, Eftel patted her head and praised her for 400 years of unwavering dedication, leaving Merlin flustered and shedding tears of joy at her master's return. Suddenly, Anastasia burst into the ruined arena, panting heavily, and warned Eftel of bad news. Before she could elaborate, a swarm of students rushed toward Eftel, pleading for him to teach them magic. Overwhelmed by their numbers, Eftel began to flee. While escaping, Merlin demanded to know why he'd even enrolled in the academy, to which Eftel explained he'd thought it would allow him to research magic as a sorcery student. In response, Merlin suggested they abandon the academy immediately. Curious, Eftel asked where they'd go, and Merlin reassured him not to worry, claiming she had a plan. Moments later, Merlin led Eftel and Anastasia to her academy, leaving Eftel stunned as he recognized the mansion he'd once lived in and marveled at how Merlin had preserved it faithfully for 400 years. Merlin then informed Eftel and Anastasia that until she concluded the paperwork for their transfer to her academy, they could pass the time in the mansion freely. Thrilled by this, Eftel realized enrolling in Merlin's academy meant he could continue his pursuit of magic unhindered. Merlin also promised Eftel could freely use the Academy's facilities for research, which moved Eftel so deeply that he hugged her milk jugs tightly in gratitude. Consequently, Eftel and Anastasia settled into his original home, and once the transfer paperwork was complete, Merlin adopted them as her children. Upon entering the mansion, Eftel was astonished to find all his grimoires perfectly intact. Thanks to preservation magic, Merlin had meticulously cared for every book in the library, earning an impressed smile from Eftel. Then, he recalled a sword he'd always wanted to wield, buried deep in the treasury. Together with Anastasia, Eftel ventured to retrieve the lightning splitter, only to be halted by a towering, menacing genie who warned them to turn back before they got hurt. Eftel politely scared the genie to move aside, explaining that he had come to get his sword, lightning splitter. But still, the clapped-faced genie dismissed Eftel as a useless petty thief and asked him never to call the sword his, claiming the sword belonged to the legendary Stormgale, who'd claimed it from the Demon King's castle after defeating him. This sparked a flashback for Eftel, and he recalled how the powerful sword, originally wielded by Generalissimo, the Demon King's second-in-command, had sliced through his level 10 magic. Nevertheless, in the present, the stubborn genie finally allowed Eftel and Anastasia to pass, but only to observe the antiques, not touch them. When Eftel tried to protest, the furious genie shouted for him to shut his filthy mouth, threatening to beat him some home training into him if he acted arrogantly. Infuriated, Eftel shouted back, demanding the genie show him the sword's exact location, which the genie did, though smugly warning that an enshrinement magic had been placed on all the antiques in the treasury and only Merlin, or even the real Eftel himself, could break the spell. Before the genie could finish, Eftel touched the sword, instantly dispelling the enshrinement magic, leaving the genie in immense shock. Just then, an angry Merlin entered the treasury and scolded the genie for acting like some nosy Karen. While staring at Eftel wielding the sword, the genie, after seeing that Eftel had dispelled the magic without even chanting, finally realized that Eftel must be nobody but the reincarnation of the mighty Stormgale. Immediately, the genie threw himself to the ground and apologized for his numerous insolence. In response, Eftel said it was cool, but then asked that he remembered both him and Anastasia face since they would be staying in the mansion from then on. Later that evening, Merlin approached Eftel in his room, requesting a moment to discuss an important matter, to which Eftel urged her to skip the formalities and speak. She revealed that while bathing Anastasia, she noticed that Anastasia lacked thick curves fit for plot development. When Eftel tried telling Merlin that the kind of relationship he and Anastasia had wasn't of the OnlyFans type, Merlin, missing the point, insisted Anastasia, as a companion of the legendary sage, must have the body of Kim and all. Frustrated, Eftel snapped at her to quit with her wild imaginations. Shifting topics, Merlin raised concern about the slave crest slapped on Anastasia's backside, warning that parading a slave with such a mark was similar to carrying a ticking bomb. Losing his temper, Eftel yelled at Merlin to stop annoying him, and made it clear that it was his decision to go around with whoever he chose to. After the enrollment paperwork for Althena Academy of Sorcery was finalized, Eftel and Anastasia became full students, but on their first day, demon students glared at Eftel in disdain, questioning what a human was doing there. Originally a sorcery school for humans, the academy had transformed into one for demons following the Great War and the Demon King's subjugation. Upon entering the classroom, the stares grew sharper, with one girl, unable to hide how cringe she was, asked why the new transfer student was human, while another arrogant demon sneered that Eftel reeked of vulgar human stench. The demon girl Maria angrily approached Eftel, demanding to know how he'd gained entry into the school. Before Eftel could respond, the arrogant-faced demon named Abe interjected, asserting that Eftel must have secured admission thanks to influential parents. Nevertheless, Abe sneered that Eftel was premium trash, and incapable of keeping pace with the teachings of the elite academy. Calmly, Eftel replied that he'd do his best. However, this only fueled Abe's anger, as he snapped that the academy was reserved for the elite of the elite and for superior species like demons and elves. Abe also made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate studying or sharing a table with an inferior human. Maria immediately chimed in, stating that even though she wouldn't discriminate based on race, she would discriminate based on merit, and since it was very clear Eftel lacked sorcery talent, she would suggest he stayed as far as possible from her sight. Just then, Merlin entered the classroom, announcing the start of homeroom and ordering everyone to settle down. Next, Merlin revealed that before introducing the new transfer student, she had news. There would be a change in homeroom teachers. Slamming her hand on a black card on the desk, Merlin proclaimed that, starting that day, she, the headmaster, would personally take over as their teacher. Instantly, the class buzzed with excitement at the prospect of being tutored by the legendary Merlin. Wasting no time, Abe rose, boasting that Merlin must have chosen to teach them because she'd heard of a superior student, himself, and wanted to mentor him directly. Stunned, Merlin asked who the heck he was, to which Abe smugly introduced himself as the big fish of the class, the student with the highest mark in the class. However, Merlin retorted that his ugly face was not the reason why she had decided to be their teacher. Pointing at Eftel, Merlin clarified that it was because of this standout student she'd made the choice. While Eftel was dying of embarrassment at the sudden spotlight, Abe angrily asked Merlin if she had taken the role because of a lowly human, to which she firmly answered yes. This infuriated Abe to no end as he stared at Eftel with so much hate and disgust. Abe angrily questioned what made Eftel so special to deserve preferential treatment, adding that he couldn't fathom why an incompetent human belonged there. In response, Merlin asked Abe to stop with his racist behavior or else he would end up a third-rate sorcerer. Merlin firmly instructed the class that instead of being racist, it would be in their best interest if they observe and learn all they could from Eftel. Though the students appeared shocked, Merlin encouraged them to seize this chance to ditch the nasty stereotype they had against the human race. During lunch break, Abe approached Eftel's desk, his face twisted with rage, and demanded to know who Eftel really was. Playfully, Eftel quipped that he was their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, infuriating one of Abe's lackeys, who roared for an explanation of what made Eftel so special to captivate Merlin. Before Eftel could reply, Abe cut in, claiming he'd figured it out. Pointing accusingly, Abe suggested it was because they were the kids Merlin, the old hag, was grooming in sorcery. Slamming the desk, Abe pressed further, asking if Eftel was her plaything. When Eftel sharply demanded to know who the heck Abe was referring to an old hag, Abe shot him a lethal stare and challenged him to speak up, leaving Eftel stammering that he had nothing to say. Later, for the day's final lesson, Merlin announced a tournament and then asked who would represent the class. She explained it was a friendly monthly event, with 5 representatives chosen from each class. Specifically, Merlin noted they urgently needed someone for the mage position. At that moment, Eftel began sweating, hoping to avoid being picked, knowing competition unleashed a fiercer side of him. When Merlin asked for volunteers, a brief silence fell until she added that self-nominations were welcome. Of course, Abe, the arrogant jerk, stood up like the main character, proclaiming he would represent the class. While everyone expected Abe to take the role, Eftel quietly rejoiced at dodging the spotlight. Suddenly, Merlin remarked that Abe wasn't her choice and, with Eftel in mind, asked if anyone else would step up. As the entire class looked stunned from their star boy's rejection, Anastasia timidly raised her hand and nominated Eftel. Since 2 students now vied for the mage spot, Merlin led Eftel and Abe to the arena, declaring a practice duel to determine the stronger candidate. As the match began, Abe taunted Eftel as an inferior species, vowing to expose his weakness. Without hesitation, Abe charged with his wooden blade, but Eftel sidestepped effortlessly, dodging the strike. Furious, Abe ordered Eftel to draw his blade and fight properly. Realizing Abe wanted a fair-looking fight, Eftel complied, planning to lose intentionally and take a beating. This time, Eftel lunged at Abe, swinging his sword, which Abe dodged before countering with his own strike. Feigning weakness, Eftel crumpled to the ground like some useless weakling. As the students cheered Abe, Eftel, in an attempt to make the fight look real, delivered a weak kick to Abe's face, expecting an easy dodge, only to smash his face, nearly knocking out his brain. Staggering backward, Abe struggled to stay upright but collapsed under the kick's force. Consequently, Eftel was named the victor, while the students were shocked at their star boy's downfall. To salvage demon pride, Maria insisted that though humans were hopeless at sorcery, their close combat prowess explained Abe's defeat. Maria added that Merlin had brought Eftel to the academy to enhance the Mage Knight curriculum. Later that night, while Eftel savored beef steak for dinner, Anastasia approached, requesting a private chat, which he welcomed. Anastasia asked how Eftel would handle a problem he couldn't handle with strength, to which Eftel replied, after pondering, that he'd make the best of it. Anastasia said she'd anticipated that answer, and then thanked Eftel for being a kind master, and also for enrolling her in the academy despite being a slave. But Eftel countered that she wasn't a slave to him. Yet, Anastasia interjected, saying she felt totally useless because she had no way to repay his kindness and generosity. Just then, she surprisingly stripped to her plot armor and said she was ready to let Eftel hit her mushy honeypot as repayment. But Eftel immediately had a spit take, covered his uncultured eyes, and insisted it wasn't necessary. Eftel explained that being her master wasn't the point, sharing meals with her was enough. Playfully, Eftel urged her to stop acting like a Playboy model, and then invited her to join him for steak, surprising Anastasia. Thus, that night, Eftel and Anastasia dined together, but the next morning, Eftel found the genie weeping in the treasury. When questioned, the genie revealed someone had stolen all the treasures. Eftel figured the genie had turned a blind eye because it was Anastasia who entered the treasury and then escaped the mansion. When Merlin mentioned that the crest on Anastasia's buns was a thievery variant and must be the reason Anastasia turned into a thief, Eftel clarified that it was the mark beneath the slave brand that had activated and then swore to break the irregular slave mark contract. But as Merlin reminded Eftel that the contract for an irregular slave mark can't be simply cancelled like some business deal, Eftel assured her that he was aware of that. It turned out irregular slave contracts, binding 2 parties, were enforced by a beast named Kami. Alarmed, Merlin asked if Eftel intended to challenge Kami, recalling how the beast once destroyed a nation over a broken contract. Confidently, Eftel affirmed that, though difficult, he would proceed. At that point, Merlin demanded to know why Eftel would choose to go to such a length for Anastasia, even after she betrayed him. Eftel responded saying just like he adopted her was the same way he adopted Anastasia, and he would protect and watch over Anastasia to the very end. Hearing this, Merlin pointed out that she was expecting such a reply from him because she had always knew he was that kind of man. Curiously, Merlin asked if he had any idea where Anastasia must have fled to which Eftel revealed that he had placed a magical GPS on the treasures a while ago, and it is expected that Anastasia should be delivering the treasures to her master soon. Meanwhile, in Abe's residence, Anastasia unexpectedly delivered the treasures to him and even gave him Eftel's prized sword, prompting him to smirk maliciously in excitement. What do you think the relationship is between Abe and Anastasia, and would Eftel get her back? Comment, overpowered mage, if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.